Hey everybody, I got the question of how and why to practice scales at the piano. And as a teacher, I'll have to say that I've gotten the question of why much more frequently than the how. And it's a difficult question to answer because it's a really, really weighty one, right? And I can talk about this for a very, very long time and bore you to death with it. So I'm going to go more towards the how, if I can do so, with just a little bit into the why. I'll start with the why, however. So, and I'll probably have maybe more of a theory component with this later, but to just briefly touch on the theory aspect of it is we need to understand scales from a shape standpoint. And by that I mean, if you look here at the C scale, the C scale is created as a shape on the piano, collection of notes, as a straight line, right? C to C, all white keys. And this whole theory shape that I'm referring to changes as we change scales. And so if we went to the key of G, for instance, which has one F sharp, its shape has one little hump in it, which creates that has this F sharp in it, right? And no matter how I move that scale, I don't have to always start G to G. If I were to do A to A in the key of G, it'd still have that single hump in it, right? So no matter how, it's circular, right? And so no matter where I'm beginning, it's always going to contain that little bump in it, right? And so, this is the only sharp scale that's going to have just that one bump in it, right? And so if I go into the key with two sharps, of course, it's going to have two little humps in it, and so on and so forth. So we get to understand keys and have a relationship with them based on their shape. And again, not just from the beginning to end, but in sort of this circular fashion, starting from any particular point, not just the key of the piece, for instance, right? So that's just a little bit of an example of the whole idea of shape behind theory. Now, the other, as to why we need to be practicing scales, it's really because a large portion of classical literature is in allegro tempo, right? And a large portion of these pieces contain elements of scales. In fact, a large portion of music in general is scale-based, right? In fact, we can dice up music really into two components. There's harmony and there's melody, right? There's this harmonic component and a melodic component. And I'm not referring to harmonic scales and melodic scales. I'm referring to simply the job that we have at the piano is either to play something of accompaniment or harmony, and there's something of a job of melody or more of a scalar-like passage in the other part. So for instance, if you take a look at I just pulled up a very famous Mozart sonata, right? This K545. The left hand's job is harmonic, while the right hand's job is largely melodic, especially as we move further along into the piece. So and here we go with scale material. So you can see right there on measure 5, and one of the most famous pieces of music that we have in the classical literature for the piano is scale after scale after scale. And we look at the tempo and we say, man, that's allegro, that's fast tempo. And this is nothing unique. In fact, this is sort of the benchmark of any first movement sonata, right? Is that we start around the 120 mark, 120 beats per minute mark, right? And this is nothing unusual. This is super common, and the sonata is sort of the staple of our recital literature. So we need to be able to play 16th notes like we have here in the Mozart with scales all over the place at 120 beats per minute. This is I think, just sort of a benchmark, like I was saying, that we have to get to in order to play a large portion of classical literature. So what is 120 beats per minute? What is allegro? Well, that is allegro, 120 beats per minute. And so we have to be playing 4 notes per beat at 120 beats per minute to tackle a lot of this music, right? So I'll get to more to the how we have to pull this off, but this is really the why we need to be practicing scales. There's 120. Tick, tick, tick. So here's my allegro, just the bottom end of allegro. In fact, allegro can really live in this territory as well. So if you're having troubles playing your scales, at your 120 mark at 4 octaves, keeping it hands together and keeping it clean and staying on the beat, then you're going to have a heck of a lot of problems playing a large portion of classical music. So there's your long-winded version of why. So as for the how do we get to that point? How do we get to that point successfully? How do we get to that point efficiently? And how do we get to that point quickly, right? So, and efficiently and quickly are very much connected. So what I think is the best way to do that is the way I did it when I was really kind of being introduced to scales, is that I created basically a notebook, a spreadsheet, and kept track of my scales and the dates and times that I reached a successful point with the metronome, right? So if you're brand new to scales, you've never practiced a scale in your life, or if you've only been just dabbling in them and playing them poorly, you need to start at a very, very slow level at probably just 1 octave, right? So I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff and kind of get to the more intermediate level of things, of being able to play all 12 major scales at 120 plus pretty quickly. So I'm just going to kind of breeze through some of these ideas first, okay? Which is the just getting started with scales concept. Not talking about how to play them correctly or the fingering or anything, just how to go about practicing them correctly to get faster, more efficiently. So if you're not super familiar with scales and you're needing to work up to how do I get from playing one octave hands alone to being able to play hands together at 4 octaves at 120 beats per minute, right? At 4 notes per click. You need to track yourself with the metronome. There has to be something controlling your tempo, and where it's not just you saying, well, that was fast, or that was pretty good, and then I'm going to try it a little faster. And what's a little faster? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's 20 beats per minute faster. It needs to be controlled systematically through this awesome, but yet devil of a device that has probably been tossed across the room a couple of times in frustration, but it's good. So 60 beats per minute is a great starting point. 1 click per note. If you're capable of playing this and back down without mistake, feeling it's easy, and without thinking, man, I got lucky, then you are ready to move on, ready to try this faster. Okay, so the next step should really be going to, speeding this up just 1 click after you're able to do that, maybe 3 times in a row without a mistake, okay? So without boring you through this entire process, let's say you've done this enough, you've tracked yourself enough to get to 2 octaves, to get to 4 octaves at, now we're at 60, right? Let me show you a way of tracking this concept, okay? So here's a spreadsheet I've created for a student. And what you see here is all the scales on the left-hand side, right? That this particular student has been working on. So, and then here's the metronome marking and a date that we have started this maybe a month ago. And in C major, they are able to play 100 beats per minute, 4 notes per click, and there's the date right next to it, okay? And then here's all the other tempos that they're capable of playing these particular scales at. And there's all the major scales listed, right? And then we've started a couple of the minors down here, keeping track. Now this student is capable of playing all 24, or all 12 majors and all 12 minors, but we just started charting them recently, okay? Because now they're at the point where they can actually be playing them hands together at 4 octaves, okay? So this is important. So when we're at that point where a student is capable of getting, beyond the right and the wrong with the fingering, how do we get this faster? And that's sort of the question, right? So week 1, you see most of their tempos are pretty close, but now we see some that are lower. A major, now we see C sharp major, B flat major. That should be a red flag to the student that they need to spend more time there and not spend so much time here, for instance, because, that is at the higher end of what they're capable of doing right now. So let those go for a little while. Catch up on these others, okay? So this is really, really important information that probably wasn't super obvious to the student at first. So you see week 2, nothing's listed here except for the progress that was made in some of the scales. So, they actually made progress in a scale that I probably should have been more clear about, saying like, let's not spend so much time with A right now. Let's catch up some of these other ones. Another approach might be, well, do what you're motivated to do. If you are strongly motivated to spend your time blazing through what you're super, super good at, then there's still value in being able to play this A minor scale, for instance, at 116 beats per minute, at 4 notes per click. So by the time you get to week 4, you see some of the progress in these other scales, etc. So this is an ongoing chart using Google Spreadsheets that I think is super, super helpful, that every pianist should be using at a variety of levels, all the way into the advanced level. And, just to mention, like, there is no point at which you should stop practicing scales. Even at the advanced level, even at the professional level, scales reveal inconsistencies in your technique, things that are becoming rusty, and your playing will always be better if you keep up on quality scale work. And if you neglect it for several months, you will notice that in your playing. For a variety of reasons. My playing is always better if I'm keeping up on my scales. So the last thing in terms of just how to better get to this point is just kind of how to continue to work with the metronome. So let's say I'm nearing the sort of the final plateau of what I'm actually capable of doing, right? So I've met my 120 mark pretty much across the board. All scales, boom, 120. I've gotten there through rigorous work with the metronome, in that, I only increase 1 notch on the metronome after I've successfully played each scale 3 times in a row, for instance, at that tempo, right? So I'll give you an example of what that is, and then I'll talk about how to get even farther along than that. So here's 120, right? So I'll go through, I don't know, let's do D flat major, right? This is a little uneven at the beginning, but I was with it, right? Let's do it again. Okay, now I've successfully done that 3 times in a row without a mistake. And I felt decent enough about it. It's kind of weird, like being recorded on it, but it felt good enough. And I think that I didn't make a fingering mistake. I didn't have an error where I had to stop. I didn't fall off the metronome. So I would say I'm ready to take this up 1 notch beyond 120 to my 126 mark. Run it through the same basically parameters of basically not feeling good about it, feeling that I'm not going to make a mistake, I didn't fall off the metronome, etc. And then I'm going to take it up a notch again, and just keep going until I finally hit my breaking point. And that is the mark that you want to put in, or the last successful mark is what you want to put into your spreadsheet. And you work your way from there. And you keep checking in on these scales where you left off prior to that. And finally, if you're able to reach that 120 plus mark, you can approach so many pieces of music that is listed as allegro, presto, vivace, that would have otherwise been untouchable. And so if you are incapable of playing 4 octaves, hands together, at a scale in D, and you want to play a piece of music that is allegro or vivace or presto in the key of D, and it has 16th notes in it, I would say that you are not ready for that particular piece of music yet, and you'll be doing a disservice to that particular piece of music. So why put that much effort failing at a piece of music when you should be putting that effort into a scale that can be applied all over to all of these pieces of music in the key of D, for instance, right? Then you are ready for a large swath of music that's potentially in the key of D, that is allegro and faster. So I hope that makes sense. And if you have any other questions about it, I'm happy to answer them, or something more specific. That was pretty broad, but pretty broad of a question of how and why. But go ahead and use the spreadsheet idea. I'll post a link to a blank spreadsheet at the bottom of my example that you can use, and feel free to just copy and paste yourself, or fill it out online, and you can start charting your own scales on Google Sheets for free yourself. See ya.